Every dog at that auction barked, whimpered, or paced in circles. Except one. He sat perfectly still. A burlap blindfold was tied around his head, covering his eyes like someone didn't want him seeing what was around him, or didn't want the rest of us seeing what he saw. He wasn't tied to a post like the others, just sitting in the straw, legs folded like he'd been waiting there long before the auction began. Folks walked around him like he wasn't even real. The auctioneer didn't call him out. No car number, no weight listed, no breed mentioned. Just a blindfolded dog in the dust. I noticed him because I'd been walking the pen since dawn, trying to find a mule or calf I could afford. My pa died the winter before, and the little patch of land he left was barely enough to keep me warm, let alone fed. But there was something about that dog, something that made the sun feel colder on my skin the closer I got to him. I crouched beside him. He didn't flinch, didn't move his head, just breathed slow through his nose like he was smelling something I couldn't. His ribs stuck out like a washboard. He was clean, though. Too clean for a stray. Like someone had washed him right before bringing him here. I untied the knot with shaking fingers. The burlap came off easy. His eyes were shut tight. Then, like he'd been waiting for me, they opened. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, toward the north end of the auction yard, past the wooden gates, past the hills where the cattle trails turned wild and the brush got thick. He stood and started walking. Not fast, just steady, like he knew where he was going, like I was supposed to follow. I did. No one stopped me. No one said a word about the dog. The auctioneer never paused. The bids kept flying. The heat of the day pressed down on my shoulders as I passed the pens and walked out past the gates, trailing a blindfolded dog with no name, no owner, and no fear. We didn't take the road. He veered left into the dry grass, weaving through sagebrush and brittle shrubs. I followed without question. Every so often, he'd stop, sniff the air, then walk on. Never once looked back to check if I was there. About a mile out, we hit the edge of a gully I'd never walked before. I'd seen it from a distance plenty of times, but it always looked like nothing, just a strip of sunken dirt and twisted mesquite trees. Today it smelled like copper and rain, even though the sky was cloudless. The dog stopped at the rim, right where the dirt dropped off into tangled roots and rock. He sat again. Same posture as the auction. Same silence. I slid down behind him, boots crunching loose gravel, hands out to steady myself. The air changed when I reached the bottom. Cooler. Still, like sound and carry right down there. The dog walked ahead, nose low, until he reached a wide, flat stone that looked like it didn't belong. It was too smooth, too round, like it had been placed there. He circled it twice, then sat again. I stood there for a long while. The wind didn't move. Birds didn't call. Even the flies seemed to avoid the place. I dropped to my knees beside the stone and touched it. Warm, but not from the sun. It felt like something underneath. It was breathing slow and deep. I wanted to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I brushed the dust away. My fingers found scratches on the surface. Not carvings, not letters, just long, uneven grooves, as if someone with claws had tried to get out from underneath. The dog hadn't moved. I looked at him, and for the first time, he looked back. His eyes were the color of dried blood. Not red, just dull and tired, like he'd seen too much. I whispered, "What is this?" He lay down on the stone. The last light of day hit the ridge above, casting long shadows down the gully walls. And in that moment, I heard it, faint like wind through dead leaves. But it wasn't wind. It was whispering, a language I didn't know, a rhythm that didn't belong to any people I'd heard. The dog's ears perked. The whispering stopped. Then the wind came, fast and cold, rushing down into the gully like something had just exhaled. The stone shifted, just a hair, enough to make the dirt around it crack. I backed away. The dog didn't. He rested his head on the stone, eyes never closing. I should have run. I should have turned back toward the auction yard and never looked behind me. But I didn't. I sat down in the dirt, beside a blindfolded dog, as the last light drained from the sky, and I waited. I didn't know for what, but deep in my bones, I felt it waking, not with violence, with memory, with hunger, with patience, something older than fences or towns or names. And I knew, without knowing why, that the dog hadn't been blindfolded to protect him. He'd been blindfolded to protect us. By morning, the dog was already standing again, facing north like he had more places to go. He hadn't made a sound all night. Neither had I. We'd sat there till dawn in that gully of dead wind and smooth stone, listening to the earth breathe beneath us. When the sun cracked over the hills, it lit the valley in a color I didn't recognize. Not gold, not orange, something sickly, like a bruise that never healed, and the air smelled off. Not rotten, not burnt, just wrong, like the scent of metal on your tongue when you bite it too hard. I climbed out first. The dog followed, quiet as ever. We crossed the field back toward my place. A 2-room cabin with a sagging porch and a broken fence. I half expected the world to feel normal again once I saw the roofline, but it didn't. It wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't. No birds, no wind, not even the usual whining of flies around the trough. The air just hung there like time forgot to move. I filled a bowl with water, but the dog didn't drink. He stood still at the edge of the porch, head tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Every now and then, his ears would twitch toward the barn, then the hills, then the gully behind us. I tried to get back to normal, fed the hens, though they didn't come out of the coop. Even my old horse, Boone, refused to leave the far corner of the corral. He just stood with his back to me, head low, tail still. Not a twitch. I called his name. He didn't turn. It was the first time in my life he'd ignored me. The wind picked up in short gusts around noon, but it was strange, jerky, like someone flipping a switch on and off. Each burst came with silence before and after, like the world took a breath and held it, then exhaled with something heavy behind it. The dog finally walked toward the barn. Slow, careful. I followed, boots crunching on dry grass. The barn door wasn't locked, but it stuck like the wood had swollen overnight. Took me both hands and a shoulder shove to get it open. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt colder, not from air, but from something older than cold. Dust drifted in long straight lines, as if frozen midair. The dog stepped onto the hay-covered floor and growled. Low, not angry, more like a warning. His tail stayed low, his body rigid. He sniffed at the far corner where Pa's old saddle used to hang. There was nothing there. I said his name, not that I'd given him one. Just a soft sound like a question. He didn't look back. Instead, he lay down and placed his paw against a patch of dirt that looked no different than the rest. Then he dug, slow at first, gentle. I knelt beside him. The scent hit me first. It wasn't death. Not exactly. More like dust soaked in sickness. We unearthed something round. A stone again, but not like the one in the gully. This one was rough, jagged, almost like a chunk of something broken off. Same unnatural warmth. Same scratches along the sides. I didn't touch it. The dog sat back on his haunches and stared at it, then up at me. That's when the light shifted. Outside, the sun hadn't moved, but the way it hit the barn window suddenly bent, like glass underwater. For a moment, my shadow stretched 3 times longer than it should have, then snapped back. The dog barked. First time I'd heard his voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even threatening. It was hollow, like he'd barked into a canyon and got no echo back. Outside, Boone screamed. Not a neigh, a scream. I rushed out of the barn. He was kicking at the fence like something unseen had touched him, but there was nothing there. Just wind, and not even steady wind, just quick punches of moving air, like pressure being pushed through a narrow pipe. He stopped the second I stepped out, just froze again. Sweat gleamed off his flanks. He didn't blink. I looked around. Every tree in view leaned slightly east. Not because of the wind. The leaves weren't moving. The trees themselves had tilted. Overnight, I walked the perimeter of the ranch that evening. The birds still hadn't come back. The sky was clear, but no stars showed after dark. Just a gray-black sheet that swallowed light instead of holding it. The dog didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat by that broken stone in the barn like it was keeping him company. Or he was guarding it. I lit a lantern and set it near the stone, but the flame bent sideways the entire time it burned, like gravity had changed direction in that corner. Around midnight, I went to the window. I couldn't sleep. The barn was too quiet. The moon wasn't visible, but the ground still had shadow. And in those shadows I saw movement. Not animals. Shapes, tall and still, but pulsing like heartbeats underwater. Then gone. The dog growled once from inside the barn. Not loud, just enough to let me know he'd seen them too. The next morning I saddled up Boone and headed for the ridge behind the gully. I needed to see if this was bigger than my land. Boone resisted every step. He fought the bit, twitched under the saddle, and snorted like the wind carried a scent he didn't trust. I almost left him behind, but something told me I might need him if I didn't come back walking. The dog didn't follow. He stayed at the barn door, watching me with those heavy red eyes like he knew exactly where I was going and why he wouldn't go with me. The climb to the ridge was slow. The trail was half swallowed by brush and loose rock, and the farther I rode, the quieter it got. Not just birdless quiet, so deep quiet, like sound itself had gone hollow. Even Boone's hooves barely made a sound against the dirt. I reached a stretch of land I'd never bothered to explore. It didn't look like much. Just old mesquites twisted by wind, patches of bare earth, and a dry creek bed curling between them. But the dog had led me this direction before. I remembered the way his body tensed when we passed the side of the hills. Like something here pushed back at him. I dismounted and walked the rest on foot. The first thing I noticed was the shape of the ground. It looked flat from a distance, but standing on it, I saw it sloped ever so slightly inward, a shallow, unnatural dip, like a basin trying to hide itself. The center was bare. No weeds, no grass, no rocks, just dry, cracked dirt the color of bone. I knelt and brushed my palm over the surface. The ground felt warm again, like the stone in the barn, but here it pulsed, a slow, deep rhythm, almost like a breath. In, out. Then came the smell, sharp and bitter, like blood that had been boiled. It clung to the back of my throat and made my stomach lurch. I looked around. The trees at the edges all leaned away from this spot, roots exposed, bark cracked, limbs bent as if they were trying to crawl backward. Not from wind, but from knowing. I took a few steps toward the center, and the pressure in my ears changed. A soft ringing started. Not loud, just enough to make me feel like I'd been underwater too long. That's when I saw them. Scratches, not on stone this time, but on the dirt itself, as if something below had tried to claw its way out, and the soil had hardened too fast, trapping the motion in mid-spasm. I dropped to one knee, touched the markings, and something shifted beneath me. A groan, low, like would under strain, or a house settling, but it came from under the ground. Boone cried out and kicked hard against his tether, nearly ripping the reins free from the tree. Then I saw it, not movement, shape, a perfect circle at the basin center, maybe 6 feet across. The dust inside it didn't move like the rest. It shimmered, breathed, the way heat rises off asphalt. But it wasn't heat. It was cold, a deep coiling cold that didn't touch skin. It reached straight into the ribs. I backed away, didn't run, didn't turn, just stepped out of the basin and looked back once. The shimmer stopped the moment my boot hit the outer edge. Back at the cabin, the sky had dimmed, not from clouds. The sun still shone, but the light felt thin, like it had passed through something before reaching us. I found the dog sitting by the barn again, still staring at the stone we'd unearthed. He hadn't moved it, hadn't touched it, but there were new scratches along the floorboards, around the stone, not across it. Circles, spirals, like a map drawn by something that didn't use hands. I didn't ask questions. I just sat beside him, and for the first time, he leaned his head against my leg. Not for comfort. Just weight. Solid, deliberate weight. Like he was anchoring me in place. That night, the power flickered once, even though I didn't have electricity. Just lanterns and oil. But still, something in the air buzzed and snapped like wires that frayed just outside the walls. I lit a match, and every shadow it cast leaned toward me. Boone paced the paddock without sound, nostrils flared, eyes white. At midnight, I heard the voice. Not in my ears, in my spine. It wasn't words, just the shape of thought. Heavy, round, old. It came from under the basin, from under my land, from under everything. The dog lifted his head, and outside, the wind picked up, but not across the fields, just through the barn. One straight current of air that didn't stir the trees, didn't move the grass. It curled around the barn walls, bent around my porch, and entered through the cracks in the floor. The smell came with it. Rust, wet clay, and something older than either. I looked outside, expecting darkness. Instead, I saw hoof prints, leading from the barn to the basin. Not Boone's, not cow, too long, too thin, like they had more joints than they should have. The dog didn't bark this time. He just stared. And for the first time, I understood what he was waiting for. Not rescue, not rest. Permission. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with my shotgun across my lap, though deep down, I knew it wouldn't do a thing against what was coming. The shells felt useless. Too clean. Too modern. The thing that had left those prints didn't know what a shotgun was. Wouldn't care if I fired it. It came from a time before noise had meaning. The dog stayed curled near my boots, eyes wide open, breathing slow and steady. Every few minutes, his ears would twitch toward the barn, then toward the hills again, like something was calling, far off, but not in sound, in feeling. The wind never stopped. Not fully, just little pulses, like something breathing through the soil. It came in threes. Inhale, exhale, pause, inhale again. The rhythm never changed. Even the grass bent in time with it. By dawn, the light returned, but not the warmth. Everything looked sunlit, but the air was colder than it should have been. Boone stood in the far corner of the pasture, legs stiff, eyes locked on the horizon like he saw something walking that I couldn't. I poured feed for the hens. None came out. The dog walked to the barn without waiting for me. I followed, slower this time, my hand brushing every post as I passed. As if grounding myself mattered now. Inside, the dust had gathered strange. Not like before. Now it curled around the edges of the room, pressed flat in the middle like something had sat in the air all night, heavy and unseen. The stone was gone, not moved. Gone. No crack in the wood. No sign of digging. Just a round space where it used to sit, smooth and warm as skin. Now it was just air and cold. The dog sniffed once, then lay down in the center of the gap. He looked at me like he was sorry. I didn't know for what. At noon, I heard Boone scream again. But this time, I wasn't the first to react. The dog bolted from the barn, faster than I'd ever seen him move. I chased him across the pasture, and found Boone collapsed by the fence line. Foam on his mouth, eyes rolled so far back I saw more white than color. The dog didn't approach. He sat 5 feet away, head low, ears flat, tail still. Boone twitched once, then again, then stopped. I dropped to my knees beside him and pressed my hand to his neck. No breath, no sound, just a strange warmth under his skin, like something was trying to light him from the inside out. The moment I touched him, the wind stopped, dead still. And in that stillness, I heard them again. Not whispers this time. Voices. Hundreds. Layered. Speaking in a language that didn't have syllables. Just tones. Rises and drops. Like a song made from wood and stone and hunger. The sky darkened. Not like a storm, but like something had passed between us and the sun. I stood and looked up. Nothing there, but the light dimmed, and the trees across the hill all bent in the same direction, like bowing towards something invisible walking through the field. The dog growled low and started walking again, back toward the basin. I followed, not because I wanted to, because it was time. The basin hadn't changed, but I could feel it waking now. The air inside the dip was thinner, and every breath burned a little on the way down. I stepped inside, and this time I didn't feel the cold. I felt memory. Mine. Pa's. This land. All of it, but not like remembering a thing. Like the thing was remembering me. I dropped to my knees, and the ground pulsed again. Not just underneath me now, but through me. I could feel my ribs tighten and my fingertips tingle. The dirt in the center began to shift. Not dug, not blown, just falling inward, like it had finally decided it was time to open. The dog didn't bark. He walked into the middle and stood on the edge of the sinking dust. Then he looked at me, not like a pet looks at a master, like a witness looks at the only other soul left in the room. The ground gave way. Not deep, just a shallow bowl, maybe 5 feet down. Inside it, I saw them. Bones, stacked in a circle. Old, smooth, almost polished by time. And in the center of the bones, another stone, but this one pulsed. Not light, not sound, just pressure, like it was breathing. I slid down after him. The dog didn't stop me. The moment my boot hit the basin floor, the whispering returned. But now it was inside my skull. Every word layered over another. Sadness, hunger, loss, grief. Not evil, not kind either. Just vast. The dog placed a paw on the stone. It glowed faintly, and the air turned warm again. I knelt beside him and placed my palm against the stone. Images poured in. Mountains rising. Forests dying. Rivers turning to dust. Children buried in silence. Animals blindfolded to stop them from seeing what lay beneath the surface of the world. A town built on top of forgetting. And then, finally I saw him. The man who brought the dog to the auction. Blind in both eyes. Whispering prayers in a dead tongue as he tied the burlap knot. He wasn't trying to sell the dog. He was passing him on. Choosing someone else to carry what he couldn't anymore. I stumbled back, hand shaking. The dog licked my wrist once, then stepped forward and laid down beside the pulsing stone. He closed his eyes and waited. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there beside the dog, staring at that pulsing stone surrounded by bones. The light coming off it wasn't bright. It was more like the suggestion of light, a pressure behind the eyes, like when you stare too long at the sun and still see it after you close your lids. The dog hadn't stirred. His chest rose and fell slow, like he was asleep, or listening to something far deeper than my ears could hear. I stood, not fast. I was afraid sudden movement might shift something that wasn't ready to shift. I climbed out of the basin with dirt in my boots and sweat cold on my back. The trees at the edge still leaned inward. Even the sky above felt pulled toward the center. Back at the house, everything had gone still. The hens hadn't come out of the coop for days. The water in the trough sat perfectly still. No ripples, no insects, no reflection. Just flat gray like a mirror that forgot how to show things. Inside, the lantern on my kitchen table had gone out, but the wick was untouched, like the flame had decided it didn't belong here anymore. The floor creaked under my boots as I walked through the house. I paused at Pa's old room. I never went in there much since he passed, but something told me to open the door. It was cold, colder than the rest of the house, and dry, air so still it pressed against my lungs. In the middle of the bed was his old satchel. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. I opened it. Inside were sketches, pages and pages of them, circles, symbols, scratches in ink that matched the marks I'd seen on the stones, maps of the land, notes in his jagged handwriting. Not just bad luck. Something old under the land, older than the tribes, older than speech. The animals know. That's why they resist. I think the sickness started when I saw the thing in the basin. I dreamed of hooves with too many joints, a face with no face. It spoke through the dog. He'd known. I sat on the bed and read every word until the sun fell out of the sky again. I didn't light the lantern. I didn't need to. The glow started just past midnight. From the barn. It wasn't fire. It wasn't moonlight. It was the same faint pulsing from the basin, like the stone was remembering itself. Or maybe trying to be remembered. I stepped outside, shotgun still slung on my shoulder, though by now it felt like carrying an empty stick. The grass bent away from the barn. The trees bent too. Even the shadows leaned. When I opened the door, the pulsing stopped. The barn was empty. The dog was gone. Only the scratches on the floor remained, now stretched out, arcing toward the hills. They weren't just spirals anymore. They were hoof prints. Thin, tall, wrong. I followed them, all the way back to the basin. The bones were gone. So was the stone, in their place. Hoof prints pressed deep into the center. The soil around them had cracked outward in a spider web, and I wasn't alone. They stood at the ridge, figures tall and still, not moving, not blinking. Dozens of them, maybe more. I couldn't make out their faces. There were none, but they watched, or waited. Behind me, I heard the dog, not his paws, not his bark, his breath. I turned. He stood at the edge of the basin, eyes wide open, no longer red, but gray. The color of stone rubbed smooth by time. He didn't blink. He didn't move. I took a step toward him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head toward the center, toward the hoof prints. And I knew what he wanted. Not to warn me, to ask me. The voices returned, not loud, not angry, just present. They filled the air like fog, filled my mouth like dust. Every heartbeat thudded like a drum I couldn't control. They wanted something from me, not a body, not blood, a decision. Stay and carry it, or walk away and forget. But forgetting wasn't freedom. I looked down at my hands, dirt under the nails, skin cracked, veins pulsing with something that didn't feel like mine anymore. The land had marked me, and it wasn't done yet. The dog stepped into the basin. He sat in the center and looked up at the sky. One by one, the figures on the ridge bowed. The wind returned, but this time it whispered through every tree, every blade of grass, every old plank of my porch, humming the same wordless message over and over. Remember. I walked into the basin. The ground didn't resist. It welcomed me. The next morning, there was dew on the grass for the first time in weeks. Not frost, not moisture from the air, just dew, cold and clean, resting soft on every blade like the land had finally exhaled. The sky held color again, not blue, not gold, but something honest, like it had stopped pretending to be anything else. I sat on the porch, boots muddy, arms folded over my chest, watching the barn. The wind moved through the boards like it used to. No more pulses. No more silence stretched too long. Just wind, the kind that carried dust and bees and the creak of the gate on its hinges. The dog was gone. He hadn't come back after stepping into that basin. But his paw prints remained all the way from my porch to the place where the bones used to be. They didn't fade in the night. They didn't drift like prints in sand. They stayed, like the land had decided to hold on to him for a while longer. Boone never got up again. I buried him behind the coop, beside Ma's old rose bushes that hadn't bloomed since she passed. That morning, after the burial, I found a single red bloom nodding in the breeze. No explanation. No roots. Just life, where there shouldn't have been any. I cleaned the barn top to bottom. Not to erase what happened, just to let it rest. I left the floor scratches untouched. They weren't dangerous anymore. Just a story told in a language few would understand. A week passed before I dared walk back to the basin. The path looked normal again. Birds perched on the fence posts. A fox darted across the field and didn't stop to sniff the wind. Even the trees had straightened a little. Not all the way, but enough. The basin hadn't healed, but it had quieted. The dirt no longer pulsed. The air didn't ring in my ears. But something was different. At the very center stood a stone. New, small, rounded on the edges. Still warm. No scratches. No glow. But on top, someone or something had laid a strip of burlap, folded neat. I didn't touch it. I just sat down beside it and waited. Hours passed. Shadows shifted. The wind told its stories. No figures came. No voices returned. But I felt them. Not close. Just watching from a great distance, like stars behind cloud cover. Not angry. Not needing. Just remembering me the way I remembered them. Sometimes I think the dog was never really a dog at all. Not in the way we name animals. He wasn't meant to stay. He was meant to find someone else when the time came. Someone who would see what most folks wouldn't. Someone who'd step off the path and kneel beside a blindfolded creature no one else noticed. I was that someone. Now it'll be someone else. The wind will carry the story. The soil will keep the rhythm. The bones will rest until needed again. One night, months later, I heard paw steps on the porch. Slow, careful. I opened the door and stepped out. But there was no dog, just hoof prints in the dust. Those long, strange ones, leading from the edge of the basin to my front steps. Then gone. The next morning, the hens came out. The rooster crowed. I smiled, poured my coffee, and watched the light stretch across the hills. Whatever was under the land, it never wanted to be worshipped, just remembered. So I remember every time the wind shifts strange, every time the shadows stretch wrong, every time I pass that basin and see the burlap cloth folded like a question nobody asks out loud. And when someone new rides through town, quiet, worn, lost, I watch how the animals look at them. One day, one of them will see the dog. They'll kneel down. They'll untie the knot. And the land will start breathing all over again.